When a decorated veteran's iron grip threatened to crush his daughter's spirit in the middle of a small-town diner, a billionaire single dad stepped between them, and his 7-year-old whispered the words that would change 3 lives forever. "Daddy, please help her. Welcome, my beloved." Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner had witnessed 1,000 stories, but none quite like the one unfolding on that humid Tuesday afternoon. Claire Morrison wiped down the same spot on the counter for the 3rd time, her hands trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, though her double shift had left her feet screaming, but from the weight of the conversation she'd overheard in booth 7. 3 years. That's how long she'd been serving coffee and pie to the good people of Millbrook, and in all that time, she'd perfected the art of being invisible. It was a survival skill, really, one she'd learned from her father, Sergeant Ray Morrison, a decorated veteran whose idea of family management bore an uncomfortable resemblance to military hierarchy. At 32, Claire still flinched when she heard boots on hardwood floors. "More coffee?" she asked mechanically, approaching the booth where Tom Breslin sat with his 7-year-old daughter, Lisa. The girl was drawing on a paper placemat with the intense concentration only children possess, creating what appeared to be a family of rainbow unicorns. Tom looked up, and Claire noticed, not for the first time, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He'd been coming here for 2 weeks now, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, wheat toast, and whatever made Lisa's face light up that particular day. Today it was chocolate chip pancakes, which the girl had arranged into a smiley face before devouring. "Please," Tom said, and there was something in his voice, a kindness that felt foreign to Claire, like hearing a word in a language she'd once known but forgotten. She poured carefully, hyper-aware of her chipped nail polish and the small coffee stain on her uniform that wouldn't come out no matter how much she scrubbed. Tom Breslin wore success like a second skin. The expensive watch, the tailored shirt rolled casually at the sleeves. The air of someone who'd never had to choose between electricity and groceries. She'd overheard enough conversations to know he was some kind of tech entrepreneur, a billionaire who'd sold his company and moved to Millbrook for a simpler life with his daughter after his wife's death 2 years prior. The irony wasn't lost on Claire. His simple was her impossible dream. "Daddy, look!" Lisa held up her drawing, a princess on a horse, fleeing from what appeared to be a dragon made entirely of scribbled black marker. "She's escaping." "Beautiful, sweetheart," Tom said, his voice thick with the kind of love that made Claire's chest ache. The bell above the door chimed, and Claire's body went rigid. She knew that sound, the heavy footfall, the particular way the door swung shut with just a bit too much force. Her father had arrived. Sergeant Ray Morrison, retired, surveyed the diner like he was still patrolling hostile territory. At 63, he carried his military bearing like a weapon, his gray crew cut and ramrod posture announcing his presence before he spoke. His eyes found Claire immediately, and she saw the calculation there, noting her position, her proximity to customers, already compiling a list of infractions. "Claire," he barked, loud enough to make several patrons turn, "I need to talk to you, now." It wasn't a request. It never was. Claire's throat tightened. "I'm working, Dad. My shift isn't—" "I don't care about your shift." He was moving toward her now, closing the distance with that measured march she knew so well. "You missed dinner Sunday. You didn't return my calls. You think you can just ignore—" "Sir." Tom's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He'd stood up, placing himself slightly between Claire and her father, not aggressively, but deliberately. "I don't think this is the appropriate place for this conversation." Ray's eyes narrowed, assessing this new threat. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who believes people should be able to work without being harassed," Tom replied evenly. Lisa had stopped drawing, her young face troubled as she watched the adults. "Harassed?" Ray's laugh was harsh. "That's my daughter. I'm having a conversation with my daughter, and unless you're her employer, I suggest you mind your own business." Claire wanted to disappear. She wanted the diner floor to open up and swallow her whole. The attention of every customer was now fixed on their little tableau. and she could feel the familiar panic rising, that suffocating sensation of being trapped between her father's expectations and her desperate need to be her own person. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Let's talk later. I promise You'll what? Make more excuses? You're 32 years old, Claire, living in that rat trap apartment, working this dead-end job. I didn't raise you to be a quitter. Your mother would be ashamed." The words hit like physical blows. Claire's mother had died when she was 16, and Ray had wielded her memory like a weapon ever since, a tool to shape Claire into whatever image he'd decided was acceptable. The perfect daughter, the obedient soldier in his one-person army. Tom stepped forward. "I think you need to leave. I think you need to remember that some of us actually served this country instead of sitting behind computers making money," Ray shot back, his face reddening. "Daddy?" Lisa's small voice was uncertain, frightened. "Is that man going to hurt Claire?" The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. From a child's perspective, Ray Morrison, with his aggressive posture and raised voice, was the threat, the danger. And something in that observation seemed to reach Tom on a primal level. "No one's going to hurt anyone," Tom said firmly, pulling out his phone. "But I'm calling the police if you don't leave this woman alone." Ray's eyes darted between Tom, Claire, and the other patrons, several of whom had their own phones out now. In the age of viral videos and social media justice, even sergeants had to retreat sometimes. "This isn't over," Ray said to Claire, pointing a finger like a weapon. "You and I are going to have a conversation about respect and responsibility." He turned and marched out, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Claire stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The diner gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation, but she could feel the curious glances, the whispered speculations. Heat crept up her neck, spreading across her cheeks like wildfire. "Hey," Tom said softly. "You okay?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to smile and brush it off and retreat into that comfortable invisibility. Instead, tears welled up, and she hated herself for crying in front of this stranger and his daughter, in front of the whole damn diner. "I need to—" She gestured vaguely toward the back, toward the kitchen, toward anywhere that wasn't here. "Take your time," Tom said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only concern. "We'll still be here." Claire fled to the back room, pushing through the swinging kitchen door with enough force that it smacked against the wall. She pressed her back against the cool metal of the walk-in freezer, gulping air like she'd been drowning. "Girl, what in the—" Denise, the line cook, turned from the grill, spatula in hand. At 50-something with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen everything twice, Denise was the closest thing Claire had to a mother figure. "Was that your daddy out there causing a scene again?" Claire nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "That man needs to learn some boundaries," Denise said, shaking her head. She wiped her hands on her apron and pulled Claire into a hug that smelled like grease and comfort. "You're a grown woman, baby. You don't owe him your whole life just because he served his country." "He's my father," Claire whispered into Denise's shoulder. "And that gives him the right to control you? To embarrass you at work?" Denise pulled back, holding Claire at arm's length. "Your mama, God rest her soul, wouldn't want this for you. She'd want you free." Free. The word felt foreign, impossible. Claire had spent so long living under her father's rules, his schedules, his expectations, his constant disappointment, that she'd forgotten what freedom even looked like. "That gentleman out there," Denise continued, nodding toward the dining area. "The one with the pretty little girl, he stood up for you. Not many men would do that for a stranger." "He doesn't even know me," Claire said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Maybe that's exactly why he could see clearly," Denise replied with a knowing smile. "Sometimes strangers see us better than family does." When Claire finally gathered the courage to return to the dining area 15 minutes later, she half expected Tom and Lisa to be gone. Instead, they were still in booth 7, Lisa coloring a fresh placemat while Tom typed something on his phone. The sight made her chest constrict with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She approached hesitantly, coffee pot in hand like a shield. I'm sorry about that. About everything. Tom looked up, and his expression was so genuinely kind that Claire nearly started crying again. You have nothing to apologize for. He's not usually. She stopped herself. That was a lie. Her father was always like that. Always commanding, always controlling, always convinced he knew what was best for everyone. Actually, he is usually like that. I'm sorry you had to witness it. Claire? Tom set his phone down, giving her his full attention. Can you sit for a minute? She glanced around nervously. The lunch rush was over and only a handful of customers remained, scattered throughout the diner like islands. Her manager, Pete, was in the back office doing paperwork. Technically, she could take a break. Just for a second, she said, sliding into the booth across from Tom. Lisa looked up from her drawing and smiled, a gap-toothed grin that made Claire's heart melt. I made you a picture, Lisa announced, turning her placemat around. It showed 3 figures, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with a ponytail. They were all holding hands under a rainbow. That's you. You're pretty. Claire felt tears threatening again. Thank you, sweetheart. That's beautiful. Tom reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. Look, I know this is none of my business, but what I saw out there, that's not okay. The way he spoke to you. He's my father, Claire said automatically, the same defense she'd been using for years. He has high expectations. He wants what's best for me. Does he? Tom's voice was gentle but firm, because from where I was sitting, it looked like he wanted to control you. There's a difference between caring and controlling. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Claire had told herself to survive. She opened her mouth to argue, to defend, to explain, but found she couldn't. Because Tom was right. Deep down, she'd always known he was right. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Tom leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. You don't have to figure it all out right now, but you do have options. You're not trapped, even if it feels that way. Lisa, sensing the weight of the adult conversation, had gone back to her drawing, adding clouds and birds to her rainbow scene. The innocence of it, the simple belief that problems could be colored away, made Claire ache with something like envy. Options, Claire repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. Like what? Tell my father to leave me alone? He'll just show up at my apartment. He has a key. He thinks it's his right to check on me, to make sure I'm not wasting my potential. She made air quotes with her fingers, her voice taking on a bitter edge. Then you change the locks, Tom said simply. You set boundaries. You tell him that if he wants a relationship with you, it has to be on your terms, not his. Claire laughed, but it came out hollow. You make it sound so easy. You don't know him. He's a decorated sergeant. He ran a platoon. He doesn't accept no for an answer. He's not your commanding officer, Claire. He's your father. And fathers don't get to bully their adult children just because they served in the military. Tom's jaw tightened slightly, and Claire caught a glimpse of steel beneath his gentle exterior. My wife, Lisa's mother, she had a controlling father too. Took her years to break free. By the time she did, she'd lost so much time living the life he wanted instead of the one she deserved. The past tense wasn't lost on Claire. She'd heard the whispers around the diner. Cancer, sudden, devastating. Tom had moved to Millbrook to escape the memories, to build something new with his daughter. I'm sorry, Claire said softly. About your wife. Thank you. Tom glanced at Lisa, who was now humming quietly as she colored. Losing her taught me something important. Life's too short to spend it under someone else's thumb. Even if that someone loves you, especially if that someone loves you. The words settled over Claire like a blanket, warm but heavy. She thought about the years she'd spent trying to be the daughter her father demanded, the nursing degree she'd abandoned because he said it was beneath her, the engagement she'd broken off because her fiancé lacked ambition in her father's eyes. The dreams she'd buried so deep she could barely remember what they looked like. What would you do, she asked, if you were me? Tom considered the question carefully, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Honestly, I'd start small, one boundary at a time. Maybe it's not answering his calls after a certain hour. Maybe it's skipping one of his mandatory dinners. Small acts of independence that remind you and him that you're your own person. He'll be furious, Claire said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt a tiny spark of something dangerous. Hope. Probably, Tom agreed. But here's the thing about bullies, and I say this with respect to his service. People who control through intimidation only have as much power as you give them. The first time you say no and mean it, something shifts. Claire wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the thought of defying her father made her stomach twist with anxiety. She'd spent 32 years learning to read his moods, to anticipate his demands, and to make herself smaller so he could feel bigger. I can see you don't believe me, Tom said with a slight smile. So how about this? Let me help you. Not in a weird way, he added quickly, holding up his hands. But I've been where you are. Well, not exactly, but close enough. And I have resources. If you need a new lock for your door, I know a locksmith. If you need someone to be there when you have a difficult conversation, I'll sit in a coffee shop and wait. If you need a job that pays better than this... I can't accept charity, Claire interrupted, her pride flaring. It was one thing to be controlled by her father. It was another to become some rich man's project. It's not charity, it's... solidarity. Tom's expression grew more serious. Look, I moved to this town because I wanted Lisa to grow up somewhere real, somewhere kind. But kindness isn't just about being friendly. It's about helping people who need it. And Claire, you need it. I saw that the moment your father walked through that door. Lisa looked up suddenly, her crayon paused mid-stroke. Daddy always helps people, she announced matter-of-factly. That's what heroes do. The simple statement, delivered with such childlike certainty, broke something open in Claire's chest. When was the last time someone had offered to help her, without expecting something in return? When had she last felt like she deserved help? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own freedom? What would you do in Claire's situation? I don't even know you, Claire whispered. Then let's fix that, Tom said, extending his hand across the table. Hi, I'm Tom Breslin, single dad, former tech guy, current small-town resident who makes a mean grilled cheese and believes everyone deserves to live their own life. Claire stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was warm and firm, nothing like the crushing handshakes her father insisted on, the ones meant to test, to dominate, to prove something. Claire Morrison, she said, waitress, failed nursing student, professional disappointment. The self-deprecation came automatically, armor she'd worn for so long it felt like skin. How about we try that again without the editorial commentary? Tom suggested gently, still holding her hand. Just your name. Just you. Claire took a breath. Claire Morrison, waitress who makes the best apple pie in Millbrook and secretly writes poetry at 3 a.m. when she can't sleep. Tom's smile widened. Now that's an introduction. Poetry, huh? Bad poetry, Claire clarified quickly, pulling her hand back and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Really bad. Like... greeting card. Bad. Greeting cards make people millions, Tom pointed out. Besides, art isn't about being good. It's about being honest. Before Claire could respond, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Her father had a particular rhythm to his texts, 3 in rapid succession, each one escalating in urgency and accusation. Tom noticed her flinch. Him? She nodded, pulling out the phone. The messages were exactly what she'd expected. You embarrassed me in front of those people. We need to talk about your attitude and that man who interfered. I'll be at your apartment at 6 p.m. Be there. Not a request. Never a request. Just commands dressed up as concern. What does he want? Tom asked. To lecture me. To remind me that I'm wasting my life. To make me feel small enough that I remember my place. Claire's voice cracked on the last word. She hated how pathetic she sounded. but the truth was exhausting to carry alone. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said something that changed everything. "What if you weren't there at 6?" Claire's head snapped up. "What?" "What if you weren't home when he showed up? What if you were somewhere else, somewhere he couldn't find you, doing something that made you happy instead of miserable?" "He'd lose his mind," Claire said, but there was a tremor of excitement beneath the fear. "Let him." Tom's voice was steady, certain. "You're not in the military, Claire. You don't answer to him, and maybe it's time he learned that." Lisa, who'd been listening with the serious expression children wear when adults forget they're there, added her own wisdom. "My mommy used to say that mean people only win if you let them." The words from a 7-year-old shouldn't have hit so hard, but they did. Claire felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her own desires, her own life. "Where would I even go?" she asked, and realized she was actually considering it. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "You could come to our place," Lisa offered immediately, her face lighting up. "We have a big house, and Daddy makes really good spaghetti, and we could watch movies and—" "Lisa," Tom interrupted gently, though his eyes were warm with affection for his daughter's enthusiasm. "That might be a bit much for a first act of rebellion." He turned back to Claire. "But she's not wrong about the spaghetti. Or you could just go somewhere public. The library, a coffee shop, a park. Somewhere you feel safe while you figure out your next move." "And when he calls?" "When he shows up at the diner tomorrow, you tell him the truth, that you're 32 years old and you don't need to report your whereabouts like a teenager with a curfew." Tom leaned back in the booth, his expression thoughtful. "Look, I'm not saying this will be easy. He'll push back. He'll probably say horrible things. But Claire, from what I saw today, he's already saying horrible things. At least if you set boundaries, you're doing it on your terms." Claire's phone buzzed again. Another text. "Answer me, Claire. Don't ignore your father." The command made her fingers tighten around the phone. How many times had she dropped everything to respond to these messages? How many dates had she cut short? How many friendships had she neglected? How many moments of joy had she sacrificed because her father demanded her immediate attention? "Okay," she heard herself say, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. "Okay, I'll do it. I won't be home at 6. Tom's smile was proud, like she'd just accomplished something remarkable. And maybe she had. "Good. Where do you want to go?" Claire thought about it. There was a bookstore 2 towns over that she'd always wanted to visit but never had because her father thought reading fiction was a waste of time for people with no ambition. There was a pottery class at the community center she'd seen advertised. There was a whole world of small pleasures she'd denied herself. "The bookstore in Riverside," she said finally. "I want to go to the bookstore." "Then go," Tom said simply. "And Claire, turn your phone off, just for tonight. Give yourself permission to be unreachable." The suggestion was radical, terrifying. Her father called her phone a safety measure, but Claire knew the truth. It was a leash. She looked down at the device in her hand, at the string of demanding messages, at the little notification bubble that seemed to pulse with her father's disapproval. Then, with shaking fingers, she did something she'd never done before. She powered it off. The screen went dark, and with it, her father's voice went silent. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in front of the mirror in her apartment. The apartment with new locks that her father's key could no longer open, and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. Lighter. Like she'd been carrying a boulder, and someone had finally helped her set it down. The first night she'd defied her father had been hell. He'd called 37 times. He'd shown up at her apartment and pounded on the door until her neighbor threatened to call the police. He'd even tried to get her fired from the diner, telling Pete she was unstable and needed intervention. But Pete, who'd worked with Claire for 3 years and knew exactly what kind of man Ray Morrison was, had simply said, "Your daughter's the best waitress I've got, and she's a grown woman. Maybe try treating her like one." The second week had been harder. Her father had shown up at the diner during her shift, calmer this time, wielding guilt like a blade. Your mother would be so disappointed, he'd said. I'm only trying to protect you. That's when Tom had walked in, not by coincidence, but because Claire had texted him. Yes, she had Tom's number now, and Lisa's drawings covered her refrigerator. He'd sat in his usual booth, a silent presence that reminded Claire she wasn't alone. Dad, she'd said, her voice shaking but steady, if you can't respect my boundaries, you can't be in my life. I love you, but I won't let you control me anymore. Ray had left without another word. She hadn't heard from him since. Now, standing in her apartment on a Saturday evening, Claire smoothed down the blue dress she'd bought with her first full paycheck, the one she hadn't had to give half of to her father for rent at his house where she didn't even live. Tom was picking her up in 20 minutes for what he'd carefully called dinner between friends, though the way he'd looked at her when he asked suggested it might be something more. Lisa had been thrilled, naturally. You should wear the sparkly shoes, she'd advised during their pottery class earlier that week. Yes, Claire had finally signed up for pottery and a creative writing workshop, and she'd submitted 3 of her poems to a local literary magazine. One had been accepted. The knock on her door came right on time. Claire took a breath, checked her reflection one last time, and opened it. Tom stood there in a navy button-down, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked with care rather than bought from a store. His smile was warm and a little nervous. Hi, he said. Hi, she replied. You look beautiful. You look pretty good yourself. They stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, a diner confrontation that had become a turning point. Lisa wanted me to give you this, Tom said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Claire opened it to find another drawing, 2 figures holding hands under a rainbow with words written in careful, crooked letters. You are free now. Love, Lisa. Claire's eyes welled up, but this time they were good tears, healing tears. She's pretty wise for 7, Claire managed. She gets it from her mother, Tom said softly. Then, offering his arm, Ready? Claire looked back at her apartment, her space, with her books and her poems and her new pottery pieces drying on the counter. A space her father couldn't invade. A life that was finally, truly hers. Yeah, she said, taking Tom's arm and stepping into the hallway. I'm ready. As they walked to his car, Claire's old phone, the one she'd replaced with a new number her father didn't have, sat silent in a drawer. She'd kept it as a reminder of who she'd been, and who she'd never be again. The evening air was warm, full of possibility. Tom opened the car door for her, and as she slid into the passenger seat, she caught sight of a child's car seat in the back, a reminder that this wasn't just about her and Tom. It was about building something new, a family born not from obligation, but from choice. Where are we going? She asked as Tom started the engine. Wherever you want, he said, and the beauty of it was that he meant it literally. No demands, no commands, no predetermined destination. Claire thought about it, then smiled. Surprise me. And as they drove off into the Millbrook sunset, Claire Morrison, poet, waitress, free woman, realized that sometimes the best protection isn't from the world outside, but from the chains we've been taught to call love. Sometimes being saved means learning to save yourself, and sometimes the right person doesn't rescue you. They simply stand beside you while you find your own strength. 3 months later, Claire would publish her first collection of poems. 6 months later, Tom would propose, with Lisa's enthusiastic approval, and a ring the 7-year-old had helped pick out. And a year later, they'd open a combination bookstore cafe in downtown Millbrook, where poetry readings happened every Thursday night, and everyone was welcome. But that Saturday evening, driving through town with a man who saw her as she was, and a future that was finally her own, Claire simply rolled down the window, let the wind tangle her hair, and laughed. Freedom, she discovered, sounded like joy. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. See you on the next one.